is Clayton Howe's Entertainment X. For this episode, I chat with David Dabbon, and we cover a little bit of everything from relationships in the industry to networking, giving more when you're stuck, his views on taste, and so much more. So I hope you enjoy this part one with David Dabbon. We're back. I'm Clayton Howe, and today with me on Zoom is David Dabbon. David, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Clay. It's great to chat and get to be here with you.
There's so much I want to talk about, from the composing, songwriting, arranging. Before we get to that, there was an excerpt from your website that really spoke loudly to me. I want to read it, and then I want to talk about upbringing in beginning your entertainment journey. So this is from you on your website. Growing up as the child of first-generation Egyptian Jews, my house was a symphony of sound. The languages spoken were French and Arabic, and the music represented those two worlds. The influence of these languages is evident in my compositions, from the rhythm of dance to the harmonic and tonal progressions, melding together to form a unique blend of musical identity. That sounds like quite a wonderful melting pot, if you will, of sounds growing up. I'm curious, with all of those inspirations, what were your entertainment dreams as a child?
It's funny, I don't really know where it came from, but I always knew that I wanted to do theater and music. Actually, well, no, I knew I wanted to do stuff in theater. I knew I wanted to work in theater. I knew it was going to be my route. It was something that I just, I connected with instantly, and I knew it was going to be my future. But I didn't know I was going to go into music. I thought I was going to be a choreographer or director. But my mom, throughout growing up, was always like, "David, you're gonna be into music," and I fought it for so long. And of course, as moms usually are usually right, she, of course, was.
Was there a defining moment for you in your childhood or young adulthood where you decided that this would be what you would do?
I don't really remember ever having that, like, this was the exact moment, but I do recall we had a basement. We had a ranch with a basement, and anytime I'd go downstairs to the basement, I would play musical theater albums, and I would just dance. And at one point, I got my parents to hang hooks on the ceiling, and I would come up with like pulley systems, and I would use flashlights and come up with sort of projection-like things. And I just remember the Crazy for You album. Specifically that one, and being enamored by the music and the arrangements. And even I remember my parents took me to New York and was going to go see my first Broadway show, and I had convinced myself it was going to be Crazy for You. And of course, I had no say in it. Like, it wasn't something like, I want to go see Crazy for You. But we went to go see another show, and I sit down, and I just realized it was not Crazy for You. And to this day, I was just like so upset that my first show wasn't Crazy for You. But I think also that's looking back at my history and sort of the way things sort of fed into my life. Crazy for You, I never realized that those dance breaks were created by somebody else. I didn't realize that it wasn't George Gershwin's work. It wasn't the composer. I didn't realize that there were multiple collaborators on it. And it's sort of funny thinking about my path as a composer and an arranger, sort of how that show sort of paved that path, both that and Singing in the Rain.
How did you find out about the dance arrangement? Was that literally just reading the back of the album, or was there some other discovery?
I don't think I even knew what a dance arranger was until I was in college. I was doing I was at the Hart School of Music, and I wanted to have an internship at Goodspeed Opera House. And I was able to get an internship there. And at the time, they weren't having full-time. They were only having full-time interns. And so I was able to work out being a part-time music intern. and they were doing Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and it was a whole new version of it. And Sam Davis, was a marvelous dance arranger, was the very first dance arranger I got to meet, and I've known Sam for years, and it's so funny sort of looking back at that moment, and seeing his gorgeous work on that show, and unfolding sort of how my path has gone. And even when I was in college, I had written little dance breaks for some shows that I was music directing, but I didn't know that it was dance arrangements. I just sort of was like, oh, a dance break should go here. And in regular fashion, I just proposed questions of how to create it, and I just did it on my own.
I love that. I love that. Were there any standout lessons from him when you were over at Goodspeed? Does any particular moment come to mind?
I didn't really get to see him work so much as the work that he had done. And I loved, both that and looking at the score of Crazy for You and other shows. Is a lot of times when you're looking at visual music, the actual sheet music, there are multiple steps in a process. There's the work that the composer does, and then there's the work that the arranger does, the work that the dance arranger does. There's the work that the orchestrator is put together, and then there's the copyist that puts all of them together so that it's easy to read. And a lot of times when you're a student, or a fan of the industry, or even in the industry, you're only looking at the final product. You're not seeing all the steps. So
Right.
getting to see what Sam's contribution was on that show, I was like, oh, this is somebody's job. This is somebody who got to collaborate and figure out how to embellish and further a story through music and supporting the work of the choreographer. And so getting to see some of the ways that interested him, and I had randomly done Seven Brides for Seven Brothers as a performer the year before, so also knowing that show and somebody else's dance arrangements, it was very fun to see two versions of it almost back to back.
We might have just answered this question, but I do want to ask it before we move on. Do you or have you had any particular mentors? And are there any standout lessons from those mentors?
I have. I was very, very fortunate to work with my mentor, whose name is Dr. Robert Page. I met him while I was in grad school at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and he was the head of the choral department there. And he accepts one student a year. And I didn't. I had a very funny experience of getting into the school.
Wow.
For example, I didn't know. I had applied for a different program at Carnegie Mellon, and he wrote to me and said, "I think you'd be interested in doing choral studies." And I didn't know anything about choral music, but I said, "Okay." My mom's like, "David, you've been wanting to go to Carnegie Mellon. Go to the audition." So they gave me the sheet music, the list, and so I go to my library at the Hart School, and it was two pieces. And the day before my audition, the person I was working with to help me prepare told me, "David, you got the wrong sheet music." And so I'm walking in the hall so upset, and I bump into the head of the choral studies department at Hart, and he says, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Oh, I need this music." He literally pulled the correct version out of his bag. I was like, this is kismet. I've got to nail this. So I go to my audition, and it was a disaster. I had to conduct things in German. I didn't know German diction at the time, and I still don't very well. But Dr. Page, I think, was very excited that I was curious and I wanted to learn, and that I love vocalists and I love working with singers. And he loved also knowing that I had a dance background. And one of the phrases that he would always say is, is about making music dance, and that really resonated with me. And that's something I really have taken with me into everything I do, because I did have a teacher who, when I started taking piano, didn't understand that I was self-taught. And starting off as a dancer, the process of learning in a dance class is very different than being in a practice room as a musician, and never having that experience of knowing how to break that down was sort of hindering to my abilities, and I became very timid about playing. I wasn't excited about it. So getting to work with Dr. Page, who literally took all my elements that brought me into myself and the things I believed in, my musicianship, my musicality, my passion. Um, he would say things like that, or things like uh, meter is on the page, but rhythm is what you do with it. Or
I
if
like that.
something comes unheralded, welcome it. Or you don't have to preach to be heard. He would say a lot of these little phrases that just really clip to the heart. And he had such a great ability to keep the bar really high
Mm.
while still encouraging um, students to do their best without making them feel bad. And it made me proud of who I am and the things I could contribute. And I really am very grateful to him in seeing that in me, and taking me to the next chapter.
Hmm. And I appreciate you. I so appreciate you jumping around in this conversation today. Along the same vein of work ethic, what was there any early inspirations from family or these mentors that taught you about work ethic?
Absolutely. My mom uh, owned her own business. She came to the States in the early 60s, left, then came back. And seeing her build uh, her she was in market research, and really getting to see her different offices from one location to another, and sort of the growth that happened and the amount of time. And she's an amazing mom, would always be there, um, but also knew what work needed to get done. So her taking me to her office and seeing people work, at the phones, and how she would lead, and she'd put me, in a small place, but being observant of how she was running, and the amount of detail and conversation with people, sort of. It's funny you ask this, because I hadn't quite thought about it till now. Is that those moments of actually sitting in her office and seeing how she worked with other people, and the focus that each of them had to have to do their own work. It was sort of an open office space. They didn't have cubicles, but there'd be anywhere between 4 to 10 people working. Um and she'd have a copy machine, so I would always also get to play with the copy machine or the fax machine or things like that. But yeah, that was a very big chapter. And then also my dad, who's uh who's very detail oriented, takes great pride um in trying to do things as thorough as possible. And he would even tell me stories of, like, when I was cast in a show in the 5th grade, and he said, "David, you have to do your homework or you're not going to rehearsal." And it was my first time ever doing anything outside of school. And I said, "You don't want me to do this? It's going to ruin my future." And so he still laughs of that. So I think there are things about parents and understanding what homework is, and what things that are going to feed into your future. Um, I was not great with homework, and I think that was very frustrating both for me and for my parents. Um, and I think there were a couple of reasons why homework wasn't great for me. I didn't realize till I was older that I have my own way of understanding and comprehension, and I had switched schools, so there were a lot of things that sort of hindered that process. But I've always been a hard worker, and I think seeing my parents do hard work, and also having to being refugees and immigrants here, it's a very different experience, with especially two parents uh, that are not native speakers of English, and what they have to do also to um, you know to work hard to be part of the town I was raised in, and not make me feel like anything was different at the time. And I'm very grateful for their passion and their hard work, and literally coming here with no money and building as much as they did. It's very, very inspiring. And I think as I get older, I keep remembering these things that they've instilled in me, and and my sister as well.
It's interesting you bring up the language aspect. I'm curious, either through witnessing them or even just communicating, with music and arrangements. How have you gotten better at communication?
How have I gotten better at communication? I mean, in terms of I remember I was working on a project and somebody said to me um, that you have to be careful when you're talking because people can interpret words differently.
Right.
And this was, years later when I moved to New York, and um, and I've sort of taken that advice to heart, and I sort of look back at um, how things even communicating with parents or teachers, and sometimes language, just the words you use, can be interpreted by anyone differently, and really taking the time to choose your words carefully and making sure that when it's easy to sort of just talk, but making sure that somebody is understanding, and not in a way that is um putting anyone down, but more in the sense of like, if I'm going to communicate something, you want it to be understood. And and vice versa, if somebody's communicating something to me, what can I do as the listener or somebody who was actively wanting to join them in a collaboration? What are the things that we need to do to communicate to keep us on the same page? It's in any relationship. It's in any project, is literally about communication, because that's at the root of how we advance. Even working with a singer on a song, we're talking about being active and objectives, and it's all about communication. What do you want to achieve by sharing something with somebody? What is the hope on that? Do what is going to advance us from step one to step two?
Hmm. Yeah, I want to touch on Beetlejuice. We're
Hmm.
still in the dance arrangements, and it's a hybrid question because I'm really curious what your views are on professional relationships in this industry. I'm also curious what the journey was to Beetlejuice. I love when we can connect these dots. um, yeah, what comes to mind?
Views on relationships in this industry are, you're constantly building relationships, right? You're working with people, and um, I also have this belief that when you're going for a project, you're either being hired because you've worked with somebody or they like your taste.
Hmm.
Um, and when you're working with somebody that you let me start that all again. uh, Relationships really come from connecting with people, and they can come with people um, that you enjoy working with. There comes with people that you enjoy their taste. Comes with people that you aspire to work with. Um, and there's a whole portion of the industry that's networking. And what
Yeah.
does networking actually mean? And I think also there's a negative connotation sometimes to networking. And I think the reason why that is because it feels like, what can I get from this other person? And I think what a true relationship is where both people are benefiting.
Hmm.
And I think that's something that I've learned, I think, since I've been a kid, is I'm always very excited to meet people. I love connecting. I love learning about people. I love sharing about my backstory and what are ways that we can collaborate in. um, I had a meeting yesterday with somebody who was very excited to be more in this industry, and through hearing her talk about herself, I was like, oh, these are three people I could connect you with. And I remember somebody also said to me some very wise information several years ago. I was feeling very stuck in my career, um, and he said, the best thing to do when you're feeling stuck is actually give more, help people connect other people, because there's something about that uh, keeps not just your name going, but does something to your brain in terms of connecting dots and thinking. And I do really love that philosophy. And I think relationships are not everybody gets along with everybody. You want to, or you hope to,
Sure.
or the optimist in me wants to. But not everyone also has the same taste or the same approach or the same desires. Even working on, I know you were asking about Beetlejuice, and it was amazing seeing the steps from out of town to Broadway. You're having so many people working on one project. You're having all the designers from sets, costumes, puppetry, magic, choreography, lights, video, sound, orchestrations. It's endless, especially on a show like that where all the layers are not just working individually. They're actually, they're all enhancing each other's work.
Yeah.
And being out of town, it was the first time we all understood how everybody's individual work was going to be collected together. And between out of town and getting to Broadway, the steps that the team took to keep us all on the same page was an amazing lesson. It was an amazing lesson in communication, in listening, in execution, in making sure that you're not that you're some of the things that you might be precious to or that you want to include in the show might have to get cut, and being okay with that, and what it means to edit. And I think when you're in a good relationship, those discussions have to be able to happen, and doing it in a way that keeps everybody both engaged and excited, and everyone can sort of benefit. I think that's a really important goal, I think, on any project. And in relationships is also one more thing, and that is, and also being very gracious that a lot of people are putting in their time, even if it is work.
Right.
We are in an industry where, as much as it is a job, it is things. We got into this because it is personal. And I remember somebody saying, "Hey, don't take this work too personally," and it's hard not to, because when you're writing something, either being, I'm speaking for me personally, as a composer, as an arranger, and you've spent time, and you are trying to make it you're trying to make it as genuine and authentic. That work has to be personal. So when something goes awry, or something's not respected or not heard properly, it's hard not to. And I think understanding that, being in creative industry that is also a business, what it means to be grateful and gracious, both for the work and for other people's work.
You've been listening to Entertainment X, the podcast. You can follow Entertainment X on Instagram at _EntertainmentX_. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join Clay next week for another curiosity conversation on Entertainment X. Thank you for listening.